You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Hello, Amelia. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and it feels like, a pleasure to be on the Yoga Medicine Podcast and chat to you. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too, because we're diving into a topic that we don't talk about all that much, and that is handstands and forearm stands, these really powerful and active inversions. I think we often focus on the benefits of things, and there are other ways to get the inversion benefit, but there are other things that these stronger poses can teach us that we don't learn from something like legs up the wall. And so that's why I'm stoked to have you here to talk to us today.
Yes, well, I do have a really strong love for inversions for many reasons. So I'm excited to share that, because I think sometimes we can see it as, you're getting upside down, but for me, I've learned so much from it. So I am excited to share.
Awesome. You sent through a list of some of your key lessons learned inverted to kind of create a bit of structure around our conversation. But I wanted to start, if it's okay, with one of the things that isn't on your list, because I think it's a kind of nice segue into talking a bit about your recent history and helping listeners who don't know you get to know you. And that is that one of the primary reasons that I practice and teach balance poses, usually for me, it's standing balances, because I'm not great at arm balances. But standing balances is to get myself and my students more comfortable in the uncomfortable, to get used to wobbling a little bit and feeling uncertain, because it's almost as if by wobbling and shifting, we find our sense of center. So it's for me, a really helpful way to practice the transitionary phases of life. And I wanted to start there because you've been in this big transition phase, it feels like, since pre-COVID for the last few years. So would you mind starting by talking a little bit about the last few years of your life and the transitions that it's had?
Yeah, definitely. So I used to have a small yoga studio in Melbourne, which I ran for about 4.5 years, and I loved it. It was my baby, and I put all of my energy and all of my effort into it, and it was, something that brought me a lot of joy. And then I got to a stage where I had to either make a decision to sign a 5-year lease. The lease was up. It was either sign the 5-year lease and stay here and continue building. And I knew that if I signed the 5-year lease, I had to take on the whole building. And previously there was other practitioners in the building and other people that were there. So I felt like I was sort of part of a team, and I could have my yoga studio as well as other people running their businesses. And there was something about that felt like I want to teach yoga, and that's what I'm really passionate about, but I don't necessarily want to manage other businesses in this space. It just felt like that was going to take me away from what I really love to do. And so it was either sign the 5-year lease, take on the whole building and manage other businesses, or use this as an opportunity to go and teach and run teacher trainings overseas and teach workshops in different places and teacher trainings. And I made that decision to shut the studio, which, when you do shut it, you realize how impactful it's been and how sad it is to say goodbye. But it also felt like that chapter, needed to come to a close. And then I ran a yoga teacher training in Sri Lanka, and it was an amazing experience, the most challenging teaching experience I've ever had, but also the most rewarding. So it was a reminder that, when you show up and you're there to do it, you step up and you are able to do things that maybe at some moments you're like, can I pull this off? And yeah, it was amazing. And then, then all the COVID stuff happened. So, the plan to run more teacher trainings overseas and all of that certainly changed. And it just really was an opportunity to go, all right, like that's not happening. And now what? And I was definitely really inspired by Tiffany in this moment, because I remember getting an email that essentially, she said all of these things, but one of the things was like the show must go on was like a line in there. It was like the email that came out as, everything was happening. And I was in the middle of running a teacher training in person. And I got that email and I was like, well, of course, like we have to still keep sharing and showing up and all of that. So it was a reminder from someone that I really look up to like, yeah, we can keep doing this, but in our own ways. So then that started, I guess, the launch of running online classes and workshops and teacher trainings, which I'd always sort of said I wanted to do, but I'd put it on the back burner, as I reckon a lot of teachers probably did. So yeah, it was an opportunity to sort of like be pushed in that direction that I'd said I wanted to do. It's not necessarily what I was seeking in that moment, but I learned so much, and it challenged me in many ways, because I always said I wasn't great with technology, and I was like, well, here's the challenge. You love a challenge.
Time to learn. Yes. And I heard in another interview that you had a whole bunch of classes already filmed that you'd filmed when you wrapped up your studio, and you just had them all sitting there that you hadn't done anything with yet. I mean, if that's not a nudge from the universe, I don't know what is.
Yeah, there was something about shutting my studio that made me feel like, this is not because I don't want to be teaching and I don't want to share with this community. So I spent, the last maybe like 4 or 5 months that I had my studio filming all this content, because I was like, I do want to do the online, and I do want to keep sharing with these students that have been with me. And then, the weird part was I filmed it all and then I just sat on it for 6 months. And then it was about 6 months later that, the COVID stuff happened, and I had this, beautiful opportunity to launch, an online platform. I was like, I've already done it all. But it's like I needed that little nudge to go, all right, now is the time to use this and share. And
I feel like a worldwide pandemic is a pretty big nudge, but
one way it was a massive nudge to say, you've done the work, now get it out.
Yes. Yeah. And you wound up moving states and changing jobs. Like, it feels like almost everything for you has been in this state of flux. Have you found that the more uncertainty and change there is around you, the more you've been pushed to figure out what your center is? Like, what do I actually need? Who do I want to show up as? What do I actually want out of life?
Yeah, definitely. And, part of it was also, like I did the online classes and then started running an online teacher training in Melbourne. And then I did end a relationship at the same time after lockdown. And then I was sort of like, where do I want to be and what do I want to do? And so I moved interstate, moved to a place called Byron Bay. And if anyone knows it, it's a pretty beautiful place. And I wanted to find the balance between, living and being more in nature, but can I share and teach both in person and online? And I feel like now I'm starting to find this, beautiful balance teaching in studios, where I really love their ethos, and then being able to continue doing the online. So it feels like, now is a really nice balance. But each change has sort of made me go, okay, how do I want to do this now? Like, what's the sweet spot now? Because, while we're in lockdown, doing everything online was great. And I'm so grateful that there was that opportunity, and I sort of, threw myself into it. But now it feels like the balance between face-to-face and online is certainly, like the happy medium, because I love the connecting and being in person, but to be able to share a teacher training and be in this part of the world and people can do it anywhere is so amazing.
I think I read a post of yours on Instagram about this last, maybe not couple of years, but at least sort of 6 months, where I got the feeling that you were used to, as I'm used to, filling uncertainty with busyness, like having lots of things to do and, a pretty tight schedule to run. And you'd been forced to go at a slower pace and find time for quiet and reflection. And I'm just wondering whether, to me, that kind of suggested some carryovers to balancing practices, that you really can't rush into a standing balance or an arm balance. It sort of forces you to be a beginner and to kind of figure things out step by step gradually, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I went from in Melbourne running a studio, and there was always the next workshop, the next teacher training, and sort of go, which at the time I loved, but then moving up to Byron Bay, which is definitely a slower lifestyle, has made me sort of slow down and go, all right, how do I do this now in a maybe more conscious way, or more balanced way, really is sort of how it feels. And definitely, in relation to inversions, the days where I'm impatient and just sort of want to throw my body into these things, it never feels as good, as stable. I'm not as warmed up. I'm not as prepared. My body is like, better than this. The warm up is really essential. The activation is really essential. The taking your time, being patient. And so it is interesting, because I'm now trying to practice that in my life about, the preparation and the rest and the, taking your time to do things, because that's like the long-term approach, rather than like, let's just do it now and get it done. So
I love that.
How your practice and your life is reflections of each other.
Definitely. I think we all have places in our yoga practice that we can, for want of a better phrase, kind of phone it in, the stuff that's easy for us. But I think balance in general is just the great leveler, because if you don't show up at the pace that's dictated by the practice itself, it catches you out. And I do think life is like that too, if we're really paying attention. So let's start to talk about handstands and forearm stands in particular. I did my usual deep dive on social media, and I found out that you're a high school aerobics champion. So it made me wonder.
You did very well.
Yeah. I mean, it's what I do. What can I say? I'd be a great stalker if I had the energy and the motivation. So it kind of made me think, have handstands always been something that you could do, or was this part of your introduction to yoga asana practice?
So I competed in sport aerobics competitions, and there was no handstands in that, but a lot of like L sits and a lot of flexibility and splits and strength in one sense. But I did do gymnastics when I was younger, and I would say more of a like beginner intermediate handstand level when I did gymnastics as I was younger. And then now I would say I left it for a long time, and I sort of got to revisit it as an adult with a lot more sort of intention and appreciation, and realizing like all the pieces that go into it. And like with a completely new appreciation. So I sort of felt like I didn't start completely from scratch, because I had experienced it when I was younger, but it was like I went through all of like the training and the preparation and as an adult. So it's like, yes, I'd had a taste of it when I was younger, but it was like a whole new experience again. And definitely like a lot of appreciation for like the work that goes into it, and like the time and patience and all of that, which when you're a kid, you just do these things. And definitely very different revisiting.
And you wound up going to a handstand training camp, or like a handstand immersion camp in Thailand. That sounds like close to being my worst nightmare, but it looked like you had fun with it.
I had an amazing time, and it was like about 7 hours a day of handstand training with these two acrobatics coaches who were phenomenal. And I considered myself maybe in Melbourne when I was there and teaching and practicing to have, let's say, a strong handstand practice. And then I show up to this, and I was the baby of the group. And it was very humbling, but really amazing just to see how much like time and dedication has gone into like practicing something which is a skill, and the technique, the alignment, the preparation, the safety to ensure like you're not hurting your wrists or your shoulders. And it was a really amazing experience, because it was like with anything, it's, as you dedicate your time and practice and intention, I saw people balancing on one hand and doing crazy things, and I was just trying to practice getting a really solid handstand. And certainly learned a lot, and was very humbling, but also really rewarding as well.
I like that. I love the humility side of balances, because even when we're talking about standing balance poses, we have good days, we have bad days, and it's usually not that difficult to find a challenge that pushes us. And I think that's probably going to underlie some of the benefits that you draw out of these practices, that there is this really dedicated, humble, patient, persistent nature required of mastering something that, to look at on Instagram looks kind of impossible, but to realize that you can get yourself there one step at a time, one lesson at a time, with all of that preparation under your belt.
Yeah, I remember like in my early days of practicing yoga, seeing people practicing, whether it was handstands or a pincher or even deep back bends and different things, and thinking like, oh, wow, like that's really amazing. And also thinking like, oh, maybe I'll be able to do that one day, and who knows. And it was really nice to go through the experience and experience like all the time and practice, and also see that if you want to do something, you can do it. And so for me, it was like had such a big like confidence boost, not just to my practice, but just that reminder that if you do want to put energy into something, whether it's yoga and then that translated into running a business, that you can do it, but you do need to show up, and you do need to do the work, and you do need to do the practice, whether it's handstands or your business or whatever you're doing. And a reminder that it does take time, but you can. And that's why when I saw these people doing these things, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't they just woke up and they could do it. It's like the dedication. You keep showing up and you keep doing it, and eventually you're like, oh wow, I can do that. And I certainly got a lot of inspiration from just seeing other people show up and do the work.
Yeah, I think for me in balancing, that's what I love about it, is that it is the great equalizer, because, there'll always be the student who arrives at yoga practice who can already do wheel, upward facing bow pose, or can already do splits. They have the genetics, they have the soft tissues for it, but all of us have our own struggles when it comes to balancing poses. So let's start to hone in on the big takeaway lessons that you've learned from this really humble, dedicated practice. The first one that I wanted to pull out, if it's okay, is you mentioned that you learned to prevent the wrist injuries that you got early on in yoga practice. So tell us about that.
Yeah. And it kind of sounds like a crazy thing that handstands helped me with wrist injuries, because you're balancing on your hands. And I was just before this, I was reflecting on this. I'm like, it's an interesting experience. But so when I first started practicing yoga, I went from, I'm going to say 0 to hero, from not practicing yoga to then practicing 5-6 days a week, because I just loved it. And I was, I thought I was doing everything that the teachers were saying, and I was just there a lot. And I think now on reflection, I was like, I don't know where my hands were. I don't know what they were doing. Like, was I engaging my hands? Was I like using the muscles? Was I stabilizing? I can't remember any of that. So I'm going to say I probably wasn't. And then I just started to get, I don't know if you can see, sort of like the inside of my wrist just started to get a little bit sore, and then it got a little bit more sore, and turns out it was an inflammation of the tendons, which can happen from the tightening of your forearms. And I had no idea about the tightening of my forearms, and I was also doing a bit of CrossFit training as well. So this combination of being on my hands a lot, not using my hands properly, so I wasn't stabilizing the joint, and doing some CrossFit training, I just kept getting more and more sore wrists. And it wasn't until I sort of had to take a bit of like a break from being on my hands. So I started to do my practice. Everything was on my forearms.
Mm.
And I started to integrate some handstand training in, which was a lot of working into my like wrist mobility. We did all this different sort of stretching, and a lot of it was like strengthening through my hands and my wrists. And so I had to go really slowly because I started off with sore wrists. And what I found over time is once I was able to release my forearms, work on my wrist mobility, work on the wrist strength, I could hold handstands. And even in this 7-hour trainings that I went to, I didn't get sore wrists, which was crazy because we did a lot of training. But it was just that reminder that, yeah, like where the body needs to be prepared, whether it's doing handstands or whether it's doing wheel posture or, you know, any postures. If we prepare the body enough, like over time, we then have the resilience, and we've strengthened the connective tissue, and we've learned how to engage the muscles. And so, yeah, I felt like I almost had to go to the extreme of practicing handstands to now learn how to like have better hand position and better engagement, as well as do the maintenance of release my forearms, which now, you know, has translated into my regular yoga practice. So everything that I learned from that is like, oh, well, that's important for down dog and plank and chaturanga. And I don't get sore wrists anymore because those things have become really important. The stability, the activation, the release work. Because I also learned that, you know, I can do all the strengthening, but if I don't do the releasing of my forearms, it equals the same thing. I end up with sore wrists. So
yeah, and on the face of it, this one sounds like the most specific to handstand training. But on the flip side, pretty much anyone who has started vinyasa practice has had some wrist discomfort, because it is such a big adjustment from daily life where most of us don't weight bear on our hands at all. We don't, you know, flex at our wrists or extend our wrists, if you want the proper anatomical term, all that much. We're just kind of using our hands for dexterous tasks in front of us, and we then suddenly load them with our body weight. We do that repeatedly in every class. And for a lot of people, wrist pain is the result of this lack of adaptation to weight bearing on our hands. So the thing that on the face of it looks the most specific to handstands is probably one of the broadest takeaways for all yoga students, that, you know, as a teacher, you can't cue to every single part of the body in every single class, but learning how to use our hands with a little bit more activity, finding the places in the body, the forearms in this instance, that are overworking, and encouraging them to release their grip. You know, these are takeaways that we can apply to any kind of vinyasa practice, any kind of practice that loads the hands. What are your sort of favorite strengthening for the hands and releasing for the forearm techniques?
A couple of different ones, and one of my favorites, like, actually I've got a whole library, but one of my favorites was one that I learned as I was, you know, experiencing the sore wrists. And it was like a game changer of like, oh, I didn't even know my forearms were tight. And it was one of my yoga teachers that I was practicing with at the time, and it was like a yogi squat with your arms underneath your legs. So essentially you're in yogi squat, your arms are underneath your...
So you're kind of compressing your forearms between the back
compressing
of your
your
calf and the back of
forearms,
your
and then
thigh.
you can do wrist circles so that you're sort of like pinning and stretching. I love to do like it's not everyone's favorite, but it's really great. It's really great. Love doing all the myofascial release, so with the balls. And then I did a lot of work on fingertips, which once I started to do the stuff on fingertips, then as soon as I put my hand down, I was like, oh, now I'm actually using my fingers.
Because the hands and the feet are really connected, aren't they? And the same way that we're often cueing in standing poses to use the arches of the feet, we could benefit from using the arches in the middle of the palms of the hands. But for most of us, that's just a less familiar action, isn't it? To find that lift in the center of the palm.
Yeah, and I can't even remember that in my early sort of time of practicing yoga, like I'm pretty sure my hands were like dead hands. There was not much happening.
Zombie hands. It's one of the things I complain about in my teaching. I hate zombie hands.
I'm like, your hands got to be alive.
And like a lot of things, it's totally possible to overdo that, isn't it? You also see people who are clawing the mat like they want to gouge holes out of it. And
yes, definitely.
that in itself is going to create that tension in the forearms that you mentioned that so many of us have and just are unconscious to.
Yeah, so that was definitely really helpful, like practicing that activation. And another thing that I got from one of my teachers who also loved handstands was, and I still love to do this now when I'm teaching, is, like walk over to someone's hand and try and pick up their fingers. And if you can pick up their fingers, they're probably not sort of engaging and pressing down, which means their forearms aren't on. So I did this to a student the other day. I was like, press into your fingers. And then I went and his finger just like lifted up. And I said, no, press into your fingers. And he pressed down a little bit more and then press into your fingers. And so just little things like that, of like actually, like you would use your feet, press down into the toes or the big toe, like the same thing. And some of these things are quite basic, but they were definitely the things that changed, not only my handstand practice, but then ultimately my yoga practice as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, because so many of us in weight-bearing poses in yoga could be more aware of what our hands are doing. As you said, most of us practice without any idea of whether we are grounding down through our knuckles and our fingertips, or lifting through the center of the palm, or whether we're overusing the forearms or not using them at all. So we can learn to inhabit our bodies with a little bit more mindfulness and a little bit more presence. The second big takeaway that you suggested is one that I'm super excited to talk about, and that was lateral thoracic breathing. Let's dive into that topic.
So this, I learned also from this was like a gymnastics workshop that I went to for about 5 days. And this guy, his name is Coach Sommer, and he is an ex-Olympic gymnastics coach. And we were in maybe our second day of the training, which was like handstands, but it was a whole lot of gymnastics drills and a lot of strengthening drills, which I have definitely taken and just integrated into my yoga practice. But we were in handstand. I think we were in like a face-to-wall handstand. So hands down on the ground, belly to the wall. And he came over to me and he was sort of like poking at my ribs. Essentially what I was doing was a bit more like belly breathing. And when I was belly breathing, I'm not going to be engaging my core so much. So then you're not going to be holding a very solid handstand. You kind of end up sort of, waving around a little. And when I was trying to find that sort of supporting of my lumbar spine and like the zipping up using, pelvic floor and transverse abdominis and trying to breathe, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I was like, this is weird. How am I supposed to breathe and be in handstand? So the learning also felt like going to that extreme place of like, okay, I feel like I can't support my core and my spine and breathe. So the initial part, I felt like I don't know if this is possible. And then over time, practicing stabilizing my lumbar spine and my pelvis and using my core muscles and breathing taught me to breathe sort of more laterally and breathe and expand to the sides of the body and the back of the body, but still felt really stable in my core. And then eventually that meant stable in my handstands. And the ultimate translation was that's where I started to notice less back pain, and I started to feel really stable in all my yoga practice and all other postures. I was like, oh, wow, I can breathe. Like I'm still practicing sort of deep breathing. Maybe it's not as much as belly breathing, but I felt stable. I felt strong. And then I also felt lighter in my practice as well. So yeah, it was an interesting experience going, I don't know if I can breathe like that while I'm upside down in a handstand, because it feels like I can't breathe, but it was just trying to learn how to do that. So I felt like I had to go to the extreme end to then bring it back into my yoga practice. And on reflection, I think my teachers had been trying to teach me this, talking about bandhas and different things. but it didn't land.
Don't you love that when years later you circle back and think, that's what they were trying to explain?
Yeah. But for some reason I could hear the words, but I wasn't embodying it at the time.
Yeah, I think you've come across something that is 100% true when you're really in your body and paying attention, that we tell people in yoga, breathe deeply, take lovely long deep breaths, but we also often say, engage your core, gather in around your waist, or draw your belly button toward your spine. And to a great degree, those two things are opposites. Like we're always going to breathe most fully and freely in our belly when we're relaxed and our weight is supported. As soon as we need to engage the core, there's some limitation of the capacity of our breath to move, especially in the abdomen. And I think this is such a helpful thing for students to take away, this sort of hidden or forgotten capacity in the side body, because it's not just relevant in handstand, it's relevant in really strong core poses. Say you're holding plank for longer than an out breath. You need to breathe somewhere, but you need your abdomen, you need your abdominal muscles. It's also really crucial in back bends because often we're using those anterior core muscles to create space in our low back. If we're there for longer than a breath out, we've got to breathe into somewhere. That hidden capacity in the side ribs can be huge, can be a game changer for how people feel in back bends. So I love the fact that you brought that out.
Yeah, it really changed everything for me because then I felt like, back bends do feel better. And, everything then felt more stable, more supported in my practice. But it was like, I had to learn it in a handstand.
The hard way.
And then I could bring it into the rest of my practice. And it was like a light bulb moment of like, my teachers had been trying to tell me this in my early days.
But you just needed to have no other options. You had to be upside down with no other way to stay there. Yeah. So now that for people who don't want to find out when they're holding a handstand with their face to the wall, are there any particular poses or practices that you cue your students into to get them to feel the access that they have to that lateral breathing?
Yeah. One of my favorites is I do it either with a strap or even with hands. And so the strap one I really love. I don't have a strap right now, so I'm just going to do it with my hands. But practice getting people to feel the breath moving laterally. So
wrapping hands around the lower side ribs.
Yeah. And so I might even cue to like lift up through pelvic floor first, or draw the sit bones towards each other and lift up around the belly, and trying to keep the belly to the spine and then breathing laterally so that they can actually feel it. And then as they exhale, find the lift from the base of the pelvis, but then feeling the ribs and the belly draw in again. And I personally find if I can feel it, like I can certainly take my hands away and I can feel it, but if I've got my hands there, I get that instant feedback. And if I'm working with a strap, I'll put the strap around my body, around the ribs, just below the chest, and I'll hold the strap out. And I'm not trying to cut off circulation. This will actually be in one of my online classes.
Yoga Medicine online members.
Yes.
Alert, listen in.
I'm pretty sure it's in the lateral flow. And then as you breathe out into the sides of the body, the strap will expand a little, so your hands might come in a little. And as you exhale, without trying to pull on the strap, as the ribs are drawing in, the strap goes a little tighter. So
I love that suggestion, because I think it's one of those things that you've had the experience, I've had the experience, you've heard the cue a million times, breathe into your side ribs. For a lot of us, until we can get tactile feedback from a part of the body that we're much more used to connecting to, our fingertips or our hands holding the strap, it's just words. It's just word salad. It doesn't have an application in our body until we get that really tactile contact with the movement. Love it.
Definitely. I love that word salad, because that's what it is until it lands into your body, until you're like, okay. Yeah. So that was super helpful for me.
Yeah, I love that practice too. And it's one of those ones that I think can be a great way for all kinds of students, whether they've got inversions in mind or not. But for most of us, it's just this sort of secret pocket of access to breath that is useful all day to create that feeling of central support and lightness that we just didn't even know we had access to.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that kind of leads, is sort of some crossover between this topic and the next big takeaway lesson that you had, which was about building core strength and overcoming back pain. And I know that that's going to resonate for a lot of people, because back pain is just so common in the yoga world and outside of it. So let's talk core strength.
Yeah. So in my early days of practice, when I went from 0 to hero of no yoga to lots of yoga, and I started to experience sacroiliac joint pain just on one side, the typical presentation. One side is a bit sore around that sort of dimple spot on your lower back. And I remember speaking to one of my yoga teachers at the time, an amazing teacher. But I said, like when I do certain twists, I feel pain in my back. And when I do back bends, I feel pain. And her response at the time, and she was an amazing teacher, and, we share what we know, was, oh, that's pretty common for a woman of your age. And I sort of, I know, I can see your face. So now, so at the time I didn't know any better, and I was like, okay, like that's pretty common and normal. And now I know that it doesn't need to be normal. It might be common.
Yeah.
And so.
And why your age? I'm curious.
I think she was sort of referring to a woman of childbearing age. You might have more like mobility around your hips, your sacrum, as
So just wait till menopause and then you'll be sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good to know.
So I was like, okay, that's what my yoga teacher said. Anyway, so from that moment to then, when I did start to get into some of the handstand training, a big part of handstand training was building a lot of strength and stability. And a lot of it was core strength. And so I started to notice the translation of the core strength and then to my back pain, as well as handstands. But what I noticed is, as I was able to become more aware of my core, because I don't think I was that, like similar to my wrists, I don't think I was super aware of how to like really switch on my core, from like the deep core muscles to the more superficial core muscles. But as I started to build that core strength that helped my handstands, I also noticed, oh, that twist doesn't cause pain, or that back bend doesn't cause pain. And then I was like, oh, wow, I obviously wasn't engaging my core before, and I didn't have that core strength that was supporting me, or at least I didn't know how to turn it on, or I didn't have that awareness of it. So as much as it was helping me with handstands, I was like, oh, my back feels better. And now my practice feels better. And I wake up and I don't have back pain. So for me, I do have a really strong love for handstands, because it wasn't just the handstands. It was like the ripple effect of like core strength, yes, but then no back pain. And then that in itself felt more, empowering. Like when you wake up and you don't have pain in your body, you're like, oh, I feel great. I can do whatever I like. But when you wake up and you're like rolling over in bed and you're like, oh, my back, that's not a very liberating feeling. It's not a very empowering feeling. So
yeah. And again, I can see
that.
the handstand here as kind of being the ultimate gauge of, because for sure when you're in a handstand whether you've got core support or not, because it's one of the key determinants of whether or not you can stay there for more than just the split second of finding a plumb line to gravity. But that doesn't mean that the lesson doesn't apply at every other part of the trajectory in our yoga practice. It's just, a teacher says engage your core, and we do what we think that means. And we don't know really whether that's accurate or not until we get that ultimate test of, can I stay in a handstand longer than the plumb line to gravity or not? And I think you've really hit on something, that most of us are operating on the assumption that I know what my core is, I know where it is, I know how to switch it on, I guess, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like that combination of learning about like activating deep core muscles, as well as like strengthening just my core in all directions. So thinking about sort of all the layers of the core. And then I started to really feel the benefits of, the translation of like, oh, wow, my back feels really great. And I don't have back pain anymore. And so, it just was like really highlighting the importance of core strength, not just for the fun handstands, but like actually everyone, really would benefit from more core
100%.
strength.
And we've talked about the low back in a couple of previous podcasts. There was one on supporting the low back. There was one on fascia and pain. And it's kind of controversial in some circles in the movement world to talk about back pain and talk about core strength in the same breath. But at the end of the day, we know that the low back is one of the most highly innervated nociceptive regions of the body, which makes sense. It's a big transition zone. We want to be getting lots of threat signals from that place so that we can keep it safe, because that's important for our function in life. And I think whether it's mechanical or not, there's no doubt that for a lot of us, feeling strong, feeling a sense of central support, feeling capable changes the signals that we're getting from the low back. Like I said, whether it's a mechanical problem that we have there or not, for a lot of people, core strength is such a helpful counter, such a helpful remedy.
Yeah, and all I can just say is from my experience, that was a big part of my picture. And I think there's probably there's so many different factors that could play a part in someone's back pain, definitely. But yeah, from experiencing it firsthand, I was like, okay, for me this was definitely part of the picture. And
yes,
and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, whatever you've worked on yourself, then you see students show up with these same things. Yes. And they're like, oh, wow, this is really helping my back pain. Or I walked in with back pain and now my back feels really great. So it's been nice to then be able to translate that to students that show up with the same kind of things, because it's like, okay, I've learnt this, I can pass this on to you. So that's been really rewarding, is then seeing that transition for other people as well, from back pain to no back pain.
And I love the fact too that you mentioned the 360-degree nature of the core, like not just the anterior core abdominal muscles, but the sides of the waist, the back of the waist, the pelvic floor, the diaphragm. That whole circumference of the center of the body is so crucial to kind of figure out where our blind spots are and where our strength spots are, and to create a bit more balance and harmony there. I think that's a really important takeaway. And it lends itself too, I think, to the last one that you mentioned, which was having this increased sense of confidence. Like if I can do this crazy challenging pose, gosh, what would I be capable of in the rest of my life?
Yeah. And I think this is something that I've experienced myself, and then I've seen it in other students, which is nice when you can go, okay, this is what happened for me. But then when you see that for other people, it's like, okay, there's more to handstands than just getting upside down and balancing on your hands. And I think from experiencing like back pain and, having days years ago when this was the case for me, when rolling over in bed is hard, that doesn't feel, you don't feel like you're in a very confident place in your body. You can't trust your body. And then that, for me then had an impact on my mood and my motivation, because when you're feeling like, oh, the basic things are really challenging, then the flip side of that was, feeling really strong in my body, feeling really empowered in my body, then built that confidence in my body. So I was able to trust my body and know that I can do these things and it's not going to hurt. And it's because I've done all of this. But then there was that link between that confidence in my body and, putting myself in a position to open my studio and to, stand up for myself more and to do things that I thought, oh, this is a bit scary, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so there's definitely that link that I saw in how I was, living my life previously to then, putting myself in these different positions to open my studio, and even, putting a teacher training out there, which was super scary, because it's like, is anyone going to want to do my teacher training? But, then it's just like, well, I was really excited to do it. I feel like I have things to share. And, part of that was like from building that confidence and strength, physically, and then, practicing that in different ways. And I remember running a handstand, a 6 weeks handstand training, and there was a girl that contacted me after one of the sessions, And she said to me, she's like, I just want to thank you. I left that class and felt so empowered and so great in my body. And I went and had that really uncomfortable conversation with someone that I've been wanting to have that uncomfortable conversation with, because I just left and I felt like just, yeah, really empowered and really strong and really confident. And it was that reminder of like, yeah, when you like, you know, you do these hard things and you remind yourself of what you're capable of, there's that ripple effect. And that was just one example of someone sharing that, but I saw it in my students of, you know, seeing their confidence build in their bodies and in their practice, and then they're, you know, doing the things that they wanted to do, or starting their own business, or putting themselves out there in different ways. So like that part of it is almost as exciting as like everything else for me, because it's like, how does this translate into life?
Yes, I love that. And I think you've pulled out so many really key points that I'd love people to take away. The first one being that when you change your body, you change your perception of yourself. You change your perception of what you're capable of. I see this sometimes with older students and standing balance poses, just feeling more capable in daily life, less concerned about tripping or falling. And that completely changes their experience of living, changes their personality and their outlook. The second thing that I wanted to draw out from that was that it has taught you to be in the discomfort, to be in that learning phase of not having mastered something, being humble and open to learning more. And that is a big translation to life, that sometimes we're really centered and really comfortable, and sometimes we have to do the thing that feels the absolute opposite of that and is so awkward and so out of our comfort zone, but there are real benefits to be found there. And then finally, the long progression. You don't just show up in a yoga practice able to do a handstand unless you've previously learned how to do one as a gymnast, for example. For the rest of us, and even for those guys in their life as a gymnast, there was a long progressive phase of learning that skill set. And if you can do that for a handstand, you can do that for whatever you want in your life.
Yeah, definitely. It's been like a really nice thing to see go from practice to life, and especially when you get to witness other people experience that as well. It's really rewarding, and I think we can do this in so many ways. Like handstand is just one of them, and that was what excited me. But you know, there could be so many different things that have that similar effect as well.
I agree. You've pulled out a really beautiful blend of physical takeaways and mental, emotional, spiritual takeaways. And I'm sure people who aren't into handstands or forearm stands can find something in their practice or in their life that challenges them the same way, where they've got the opportunity to learn through physical experience, but also through mentally and emotionally processing what they learn there. I love that. Are there any other big kind of takeaways that you'd like to leave people with?
I would say if there is something that interests you, like for me, it was handstands. I was just really excited to learn it. If there is something, you know, especially in the yoga practice that interests you or excites you or whatever it is to dive in and be patient with it and try it. And I know for some people that could be, you know, doing their teacher training, or is it a specific pose or whatever it is. And also enjoy the journey of it as well, and be prepared for the, you know, the uncomfortable days, the days where you feel like you can't do it. Because there's definitely times I'm like, I've done so much like practice on handstands and I can, you know, 1 second hold. Like that's not, you know, for the amount of hours that I've practiced this, it's sort of, you know, there will be those days that it feels like, oh, was that worth it? Or, you know, I don't have much to show for it. But it is that consistency with, you know, practice and time and investing your energy. And then it starts to become more playful, starts to become more fun, and you start to see, oh, wow, like because of all of those hours or because of all of this time, that now I can start to really, you know, feel the benefits and whatever it is, whether it's handstands, inversions, that I would say, you know, if it interests you, and And one thing that I love is like, if it excites you and scares you, there's the spot right in the middle. And whether it's handstands or doing a teacher training or whatever it is, if you can find that balance of like, it excites you, but it does make you feel a little uncomfortable, like that's the sweet spot, because you know that there's something to work towards there.
I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up that part of the conversation. And I totally agree, because I think you learn so much on the journey there that even if it ends up being something that you can't achieve, I think all of us could probably achieve a forearm stand or a handstand at some point, but maybe it's, a really deep back bend and putting your feet on your head that your skeleton won't allow you to do. You'll still learn so much from the journey that by the time you get to your endpoint, you probably won't care that much about the endpoint anymore. You'll be a different person on the other side.
Yeah, 100%, because you've learned more about yourself. You've shifted things in your body. You've evolved in some way, shape or form. So 100%.
You've actually gotten me semi-excited about some of my least favorite poses. Handstands and forearm stands are just not what my body is made for. I end up with little pinprick hemorrhages on my eyelids, but you've made me quite excited.
No way.
Maybe trying them again. The good news for people listening is that you are the guest teacher for Yoga Medicine Online for the month of August. And you do have a couple of classes that highlight handstand conditioning. You've got a flow that builds up to pincher or forearm stand. Any little tidbits that you'd like to drop to get people excited about doing those classes?
Yes, definitely. I don't want people to get intimidated by the fact that it says handstand conditioning, because hopefully maybe from some of this conversation, you'll realize it's not all handstands. So the handstand conditioning, there is handstands in there, but there's like the wrist preparation, the shoulder preparation, the strength piece. And so even if you don't get to the handstand piece, there's all the pieces along the way. So you improve your wrist strength, your shoulder mobility, your core strength, and over time that builds towards handstands. The same with the pincher flow. It's a whole lot of things that are going to prepare you for pincher, whether it's to build your courage or your confidence or your body. So the actual inversion is like a really small bit, but everything is like preparing you for that. So please don't shy away from it. I would say dive into it, whether you're a beginner or advanced practitioner, because I think there's something there for everyone. And know that over time it might be like, or maybe today I didn't get into handstand, but give it a couple of months and you might be maybe sending me a message on Instagram or something saying, hey, I did it.
And I like the online component of this practice, in that, when you're in person in a class, there might be a little bit of fear of, oh, I'll try and I won't be able to do it. And then people will judge me, or they'll know that I'm not good at handstands. Whereas in the privacy of your own home, nobody knows whether you nailed it or not. So you might as well just have fun with the exploration.
Yeah, definitely. And there's options to use the wall and wall drills and different things. So it's sort of like find your level within all of that, like any other yoga class or yoga practice. It's like there's always levels, and it's just working with your level for today.
Choose your own adventure. Love it.
Exactly. I love that.
So for people who've gotten intrigued by the conversation and they want to know more about you or what you do, where would you send them?
I would say at this stage, Instagram's probably the easiest way. So my Instagram handle is axisyoga_. So AXIS axisyoga_.
And we'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. And so that's probably the easiest way. You can certainly send me a message, and then the link to my website and everything is on there as well. And I've also got a Facebook page that's the same. It's Axis Yoga. So feel free to reach out, send me a message, or, I like to share, sometimes some education or tutorials and different things on there. So
great.
Please reach out.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing the benefit of your experience, but even more than that, just your enthusiasm. Thank you for sharing your excitement about handstands and forearm stands. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it reminds me of my excitement for it.
We've just infected each other. And
I'm like, I do love this stuff, don't I?
You really do. One final note for Yoga Medicine podcast listeners, we are taking a break for the month of August. So this will be the last podcast from us for a little while, but we will be back in September with a bunch of new content, some of which is already recorded, some of which is planned to keep you excited. So spend your month off doing Amelia's classes on Yoga Medicine Online, build your core conditioning and your wrist mobility and your shoulder stability, and we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks, Amelia. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.